I am Joe Witt, Minnesota Bankers Association, and I want to welcome you to this edition of the MBA Banking Buzz. My guest today is Tony Ofstead from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. We are going to talk about financial crimes and fraud. But before I jump into that topic, I wanted to make a couple introductory remarks. Later this month, the MBA will be going to Washington, D.C. for our annual visit. We're going to lobby our members of Congress and also meet with the new heads of the regulatory agencies. We have a large crew going on this trip, and I'm looking forward to getting some good work done. Under the last administration, the banking regulators took a very aggressive position on both regulatory enforcement and regulatory rulemaking. In fact, some of the positions were so aggressive that we thought that they actually violated the federal laws that govern the regulatory agencies. There were numerous lawsuits that were filed, including our lawsuit against the FDIC. Several of those lawsuits have been settled now with the new administration. In other cases, the agencies have simply withdrawn the rules that were causing the problems. The new administration's agencies have said that they're going to be more respectful of their regulated entities and will treat them fairly as required by law. On the legislative side, we are very hopeful that Congress will pass the Safe Banking Act, and that would allow banks to serve cannabis-related businesses in states where cannabis is legal. We would welcome that legislation so that banks can provide basic banking products, deposit accounts, and loans to cannabis-related businesses. Also, we are hopeful that Congress will pass the ACRE Act. That bill would put banks on equal footing for tax reasons with the Farm Credit System lenders. We're very hopeful that legislation is going to pass this year. This bill has broad support, bipartisan support, because it is good tax policy and because it would be a great for farmers, ranchers, and also for rural homeowners. Finally, I'm happy to report that there is a real chance that Congress will start applying a tax to credit unions as well. The large credit unions that have outgrown their mission essentially act as banks right now, and there's really no reason for them to continue to receive their tax exemption. There will be a tax bill this year to extend the 2017 Tax Cuts and Job Act provisions, and when they re-extend those provisions, they're going to need to find some tax revenue to make up for those extensions. Taxing the massive credit unions is basically low-hanging fruit. Did you know that one credit union in 2024 had total profits of $1.7 billion? It's true. All of it was tax-free. It's time for the credit union industry to pay their fair share of income taxes to support our federal and state programs. It will be an interesting trip to DC. It'll be a great time to be out there. There's a lot happening. So it's a great time for us to make sure that Minnesota bankers' voices are heard. All right, let's get to the business at hand. I want to welcome my guest, Tony Ofstead. Tony is Special Agent in charge of financial crimes and fraud at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, as I mentioned. Hello, Tony.
Hi.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Please tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from originally?
Oh, well, I grew up on the east side of St. Paul and went to school to be a doctor, and then chose to not do that. So became a paramedic, did that for several years, transitioned into law enforcement with the Woodbury Police Department. At the time, they were hiring paramedics and cross-training to law enforcement. So had that opportunity to dip my toe in the water in law enforcement and sort of have been there ever since. I think having the opportunity to sort of expand in that space and see the different things really filled the niche for me in connecting with people and my desire to help people and problem solve. And so navigated up through Woodbury, retired unsuccessfully, and went over to the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis, where I had a here, we were second in command, and we oversaw the third largest territory in the nation by size, fifth largest by wealth. Went from western Wisconsin. I was in charge of special operations, so oversaw everything from K9 and the academy and the training to compliance and sort of the regulatory stuff.
Sure.
And did that for a couple of years, and then was asked to look into being the head of the Commerce Fraud Bureau. Looking back on it, it's a funny conversation, but my response was no offense, but why would I do that? So I was encouraged to go ahead and do my due diligence anyway, and I did. I saw the organization, really was excited about what it could be and what we could do in that space. And so threw my hat in the ring and ended up having the opportunity to be the director of the Commerce Fraud.
Well, that's an interesting background for sure. And I'm really glad that your retirement didn't take, by the way. We really appreciate what the department has done with respect to financial crimes, raising awareness, being a resource, and frankly, preventing a lot of fraud. We really appreciate the relationship that we've had with that department over the years. Appreciate what you're doing. So, it's really challenging right now. This whole fraud topic is really significant. Bankers are really tuned into it right now. I was talking with one of my banker friends. For the first time ever, his bank decided they needed to actually budget for fraud. They always knew that there might be a little bit of fraud that happens here and there, and they'd kind of deal with it. But for the very first time, they felt that, to be fair, they really needed to actually officially account for it in their budget, which is a really kind of a telling thing for a community bank to think that that's where we are in the world right now. So, what are some of the bigger frauds that you're seeing right now in your day-to-day work? And I know as you're partnering with banks, what are some of the trends you're seeing? What's some of the worst stuff you're seeing right now?
That's a great question. And you're right, it is heartbreaking to hear people are having to plan for fraud. But I also think I'm leaving people hanging because I said I was the director of the Commerce Fraud Bureau, and you introduced me as the supervisory special agent at the BCA.
Yes.
So there was a transition.
Yes.
So to the point that we're talking about, fraud has been identified as an issue in the state of Minnesota.
Right.
And the governor signed an executive order in January that moved the Commerce Fraud Bureau out of Commerce and merged it with the Financial Crimes Unit of the BCA to create one new entity, which is the Financial Crimes and Fraud section of the BCA. So in that, I went from Commerce to the BCA. So I still oversee what was the Fraud Bureau.
Right.
And now, as I tell folks, we have 14 new friends in that space, or as I'm talking to those folks, they have 28 new friends in that space, where we become a new entity to tackle a lot of diverse ground and very narrow scope that has a lot of expertise in that space. So to that end, fraud is as old as time, and financial crimes are as old as time. And, as we look at Holy Week now, and the story of Jesus overturning the money changer tables, and then the conversations before that about Caesar and his taxes and the weights and the scales. So fraud isn't new. It's essentially getting something that you aren't owed, either through artifice, trick, deception, something along those lines.
Right.
So while the schemes haven't necessarily changed, the mechanisms that people are using have changed significantly. So investment fraud still remains one of the biggest ones. Something for now. We now see with some of that technology, the romance scams, the transnational crimes happening in that space, business email compromises. Yes. Also significant growth in that space with phishing and smishing and different types of schemes to get people to give unintended information to allow people to be successful in that space.
Right. Yeah, we're not immune to it. No one is, but we had the situation where they were doing the gift card one.
Yep.
They had our logo on the email. They had all my information. It was an email that supposedly came from me, sent to sent to one of our employees, and thankfully we didn't lose any money on it. But when it hits that close to home, it's really frustrating and a little scary that people can be that good at it. They can fool one of our employees. We only have about 20 employees, so it's not like we're a massive shop. So it's very unsettling, though, to think that you can be part of one of those situations. And you're right. As the mechanisms change, it seems like they're getting better. One of the things that we talked about briefly was the voice cloning thing, and how that can have a huge impact on either one of the romance schemes or the kid who's in prison in Mexico. I mean, maybe talk a little bit about some of those things that you're seeing.
Yeah, technology. It can be used for good or for evil, right?
Right.
So when we talk specifically about AI, there is a ton of advancements in the growth of using AI for good. And we generally talk about bots. So being able to answer phones, being able to work through phone trees with a simulated human voice, and they can problem solve and move things in the right way for efficiency. We look at spider crawlers, who, when you sign on and you Googled lawn sprinklers, now all of your ads are about lawn sprinklers and lawn care services, right?
Right.
So there are ways that it can help create efficiency, and then there are ways that are very detrimental. So one of the biggest concerns in the AI space is the regulation and sort of that necessary trying to keep up with the Joneses as that technology changes.
Right.
And I don't think there is the level of education and awareness in the AI space, or necessarily even the understanding of how easy it is to become a victim. So you talk about an entity with 20 people and an email and gift cards. I can tell you a story of an even smaller business where they received an email from their HR saying they had to update their bank account information. And so they did. And because it was a small business,
Right.
It took 2 pay cycles for them to realize they hadn't been paid. So when they went down the hall to their HR department and said, well, I'm not getting paid, what's going on? Well, no, we're paying you. You changed your bank. Right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about that intersection of how business email compromises are taking place, it's the social engineering aspect,
Right.
that's really driving a lot of this. And when we look at the advancement of AI technology specifically, it can take as little as 3 seconds for an AI entity to clone and start working on manipulating your voice. So when we talk about the old Nigerian prince scams and the email, well, now we're getting phone calls from our grandkids saying, I'm in jail. And it sounds like them, the phone number spoofed to look like it's the country they're coming from. So it really is kind of scary in that space. And that's where really vetting that information, slowing it down, having those conversations, and they're very limited in what they can do if it's a true AI bot. So if you start asking questions too far afield, it really starts to struggle to keep up the conversation. Right. And I'll air quote conversation because it really isn't. It's just problem solving logic.
And I've heard in those situations, you can actually hear it click to an upgraded version of the person that you're talking to. If you ask enough questions and the right questions, that it'll say, hang on, I'm going to transfer you to somebody else. They're trying to get it up to an even better upgraded version of what they're trying to get done. It is really a challenge, and we talk to our banks a lot about wire transfers, for example. That's something that we're seeing that kind of fraud a lot. We work with a lot of the banks on their insurance programs, their financial institution bond, their D&O coverages, and now also cybersecurity type of insurance products as well. And our agents, they are just really struggling with how they can continue to educate folks. You got to educate the bank, but the bank's got to help their customers too, because they're the ones that are supposedly initiating these transactions. If they don't follow the proper procedures for issuing a wire, because they know the person so well, and if this comes in, they have to do it, It's really a challenge. So we're trying hard to get our own house in order, and that used to be enough. If we had our house in order, we were good. You remember that from all your work with the banks, but as you have to get to that next level of educating your business customers that are the targets of this stuff, it really adds another element.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember nothing happens in a vacuum. It's
Right.
all about relationships.
Right.
So when we talk about the banking industry, we talk about the tools and technology and things we use to intercept and identify fraud or potential fraud. All of those programs and mechanisms were built on human behavior and interaction with customers, where people sat down and watched and said, what do you need in this space? How do you know this is fraud? And then they built models around it. So that was really the first human intersection of artificial intelligence being generated by what we were doing.
Right.
And the recognition in that space that the relationship is what's catching fraud.
Right.
So it goes back to, if all of the systems broke and you couldn't access it, you weren't getting early warnings or any of that information, when that person's standing in front of you, asking for a transaction, asking for money, asking for whatever it is, that's where the relationship has to be in place. It has to happen.
Correct.
So if you have a gal who comes in every 2 weeks on Monday, and every Friday her bank account goes up by $10,000 to $15,000, and every Monday she's transferring it out, I would suggest you have to have enough of a relationship with her to be able to ask those hard questions.
Right.
Hey, this seems like an unusual pattern for you, having you for fill in the blank.
Right.
What's going on? Right. And having that meaningful dialogue. You don't need a machine to tell you that that person's potentially being a money mule. You now have that person who's beginning to trust and able to answer those questions. I think it's really important when we look at the relationship and why banks exist and what they're for, and then the business entity and what they're going to do and how they serve, right? You can't mitigate the business, but the business need is driven by those relationships and the people coming in the door and the trust you're able to build with them. So having tools such as a card, a laminated card for someone who you think is potentially being a money mule or victim,
Right.
or educational pamphlets you can hand them and say, hey, just want to check on how you're doing. Or,
Right.
you know, we had a off-camera conversation, a panicked person coming in the bank and I have to do this right now.
Right.
Do you?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, almost having a flyer that says, no, your grandson is not in jail in Mexico would be, you know, I mean, it's, I don't want to make light of it, but also, I mean, it's such a popular fraud that it might be something that we should look at. The other thing that we talked about briefly was a few years ago, the Minnesota Bankers Association passed a bill that allowed us to slow down certain transactions that we think might be financial elder abuse. And that law has worked pretty well to make sure that if you just ask some additional questions, if you talk to a family member, if you get the police involved, if you can just slow it down enough for them to see the light, rather than just letting that panicked person do the transaction. Once the wire is set, it's set. And you can sometimes get it back, but not very often. So as we look at how that bill was working, one of the things what we've been thinking about is expanding that bill from elder abuse only, it's in the elder abuse chapters of the statutes, to maybe making it apply to everybody. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, working in law enforcement, anything to catch bad guys and hold them accountable, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be done in a way that makes sense, but still allows people the freedom and autonomy to be able to bank the way they feel
Right.
comfortable.
Right.
I think so. 45A is the chapter you referred to,
Yeah.
Safe Seniors.
Yeah.
And it allows the opportunity for banking professionals, law enforcement personnel, other certain entities to intersect in a transaction that they believe could potentially be fraudulent and hold the funds in that account while they do some additional research and investigation in that space. It doesn't mean they can't buy groceries, they can't get gas.
Right.
Money will be released for day-to-day expenses, but it does put a cap or a moratorium on larger unchecked expenses.
Right.
So what that affords us the opportunity to do is to invest in that person. And where it becomes really challenging is, as we talked about earlier, one of the biggest crimes we're seeing is those romance scams.
Yeah.
So when someone has invested so much time, a bad actor, into you, and you're absolutely convinced Dolly Parton is going to marry you, you're not saying no, right?
Nope.
So you're absolutely convinced Dolly Parton is going to marry you, and she's going to come see you here in Minnesota, swing by your office, meet all the people. And this has been going on for 6 months, a year, 2 years, right? And now all of a sudden, oh, I broke my femur.
Yeah.
I need you to send me some money. My car broke down or my jet broke down. And now you, as the business person intersecting in that space, goes, wait a tick. This is unusual. What's going on?
Right.
So you stop that, right? The work begins at that. Relationship should have identified some of those suspicious indicators. But the work begins on trying to convince that person, hey, I don't think what you believe to be true is actually true. And that is sometimes the hardest thing to convince somebody.
Yes.
Because they have invested and been invested so much,
right,
that this is now their reality.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's pride, sometimes it's hubris, sometimes it's embarrassment, sometimes it's just, it can't possibly be because I know these things to be true.
Right.
And when confronted with irrefutable evidence, they might believe you in the moment, but then buyer's remorse is like, no, this is that, like this, I know this to be true.
Right.
So it's not 100% foolproof, but it really does give us the time we need to intersect in that space.
Yeah.
And try to help as many people as we
And, bankers are order takers. A check is a command to make a payment. A wire transfer is the same way. When a customer comes in and says, do this transaction, as order takers, we have to do it. But the ability to slow it down, not deny the transaction, just slow it down until you can get a couple more eyes on it. Even, getting one manager from the bank to also take a look. Family members in law enforcement those folks have been fantastic. To just slow it down enough for them to take a breath, to look at it, how it looks from the outside, not just in your own heart.
Right.
But what does this look like from the outside? And I think that's been super helpful. And again, maybe at some point down the line, we do make the change so that it's anybody can get duped. We're grateful that we were able to get it done in the space for elder abuse. Obviously a super challenge there, especially when you get some people who may have some memory issues and some other things like that. When they get taken advantage of it, it's really hard. But yeah, I think there might be something for us to look at down the road. Are there any specific sort of fraud prevention tips that you'd have for us today, based on what you've been working on lately?
Always, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to highlight in that space is we're in that generational wealth transfer of baby boomers to the next generation.
Yes.
So a common misconception is seniors are targeted because they're easy targets. And I really just kind of shake my head and go, I don't know how you got there, but let's think about that a little bit, right? So why would you anticipate seniors would be the ones targeted as opposed to a 22-year-old in college?
Money.
Right? So they had an entire lifetime to accumulate and build their wealth. So when we have these schemes preying on them, it's specifically geared to a mechanism or a way for them to relinquish their money.
Right.
So it's usually going to be an investment. It's going to be a relationship. It's going to be a sense of urgency or emergency. And that doesn't change, whether it is the 22-year-old in college or the senior, right? And it doesn't have to be the Safe Seniors Act. It can
Right.
be anybody. It could be you. It could be
Yes.
me. So one of the things we always tell people is slow it down, take a look. If you get an email with a link on it, I always tell people, don't click the link. It's a good idea in general.
Right.
But navigate to that a different way. Open a different window in a browser, find the same information.
Right.
And see if it's true, right? I think people these days really are focused on a sense of urgency and I have to do this right now. And that is a great tool. I mean, that's how we motivate people to do things, right?
Right.
So having that ability to slow down, look at it, if it sounds too good to be true,
Right.
it very well could be.
Right.
Go ahead and do your due diligence and check into it.
Right.
If your computer's operating just fine, but you get a pop-up that says you need to install, repair, or fix your Windows, click here.
Yeah.
Don't.
Right.
If your
Right.
computer's operating fine, you shouldn't be clicking and doing anything, right?
Yes.
So there's some things that we kind of just look at as day-to-day common sense things,
Right.
but they're only common to us because we live in a space where we deal with them often.
Right.
So education and intersecting in people's lives in a meaningful way where they can be exposed to these things is uber important, not only for us in law enforcement and those in the prevention space,
Right.
but those in the space that have that ability and the tools and the networks to be able to do that. And I think partnering together in that space is critical.
Absolutely. And we're very happy to have the resources we do, that we can reach out and contact you guys. And it's been super helpful to us as we try and protect our customers and our communities from all this fraud. So we really appreciate that. Well, thank you very much for being with me here today.
We actually have a question from the chat.
Oh, we do.
We do, so I'm gonna
Thank you,
read it.
Carla. Please, please.
We had a customer receive a very large ACH deposit from TPG IRS tax refund. It looks like the tax return was fraudulently prepared for a large payout. The friend that helped her then wanted her to wire for crypto. We tried working with the IRS and had no luck, as well as someone from the Minnesota Department of Commerce fraud. What would you suggest for handling this suspected fraud?
Don't. I mean, at the end of the day, the entities involved don't have knowledge of it, so that will automatically tie you back to this is probably fraudulent. So if the money was deposited, trying to find the rightful home for that money is great. Otherwise, you can go to Commerce to unclaimed property, and that money can be returned. So the mechanisms for those types of situations, and we talked earlier about victims, right? You were a victim, business email compromise, phishing scheme, uber frustrating.
Right.
Law enforcement is a victim all the time, whether it's the IRS. The IRS isn't going to send you a text saying you owe us money. Law enforcement sending you a text, we're gonna have a warrant issued for your arrest in a county you've never been in for a driving offense you've never committed, right? So the one that's currently going around is the Easy Pass tolls.
Seen that text.
Right. And you pause because you're like, ooh, I do have an Easy Pass.
Well, and I do travel just enough that I did have to actually think about it. Obviously, I didn't do anything with it, but yeah, I mean, it's out there for sure.
And so it's not that people aren't smart, which is commonly what's associated in situations like this. It's people are getting really good at identifying how to socially engineer you to engage with them.
Right.
The other one that's really common right now, that's the start of the romance scam is, hey, Steve, is this you still? When you respond, you've now created a relationship with that person. If you get a text from somebody, and so, right, we would always try to be helpful. That's no longer the case.
Right.
That is a 99.9% chance of social engineering scheme to see if it's a real person with a real number who will engage with them.
Right.
And then they will work very hard to prey on what you can do in that space to get them to interact with you. So in this particular case, I would reach out to Unclaimed Property Division and say, hey, I've got this money deposited in my account, it's not my account. And
Right.
it will be routed to the right people. We don't know where the fraud occurred in that space, so it's hard to say this is what we would do in that occasion. But often that is sort of the extension of the old scheme where you would get a check sent to you.
Right.
And then we'll deposit it and then send me
Send
back
something.
200 back.
Right.
And then the check's fraudulent, but you sent real cash and now you're out and you've committed fraud.
Yeah.
She's commented back, this one's getting more intriguing. This is an ACH deposit that did come from a tax refund. The customer at some point may face criminal charges, but the ACH deposit is available to her. Commerce Department and IRS said they can't do anything.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So, without having more of an online or in-person conversation or online conversation, I don't know how to move forward in that space. A real deposit is real deposit, it's real money. If you choose to do something with the money, that's where it can become a problem. So we need to figure out, like, I have 52 other questions and really want to stop talking to you, so I can go do that. That's just how my brain works.
Yes.
Whatever they're doing to sort of navigate that customer at the time and keeping them engaged is important. And getting them the resources to figure out how to navigate that down the road is going to be a longer conversation than we're over time with now. We're trying to
Yes.
solve.
So that's a great way for us to end our program here today, so that you can maybe get in touch with this person and see if they can.
We'll put
Yeah, work something out. But thank you again for being here. We do appreciate it. We appreciate the partnership that we have with the state on these issues. It's really, really helpful. And one quick note, I just wanted to remind everybody that the MBA's annual summit is coming up June 8th to the 10th at Madden's Resort. We've got another excellent program planned. Please consider joining us for that event. Check out our website for more information. Tony, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day, everyone.